Welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 250, and we're going to do something a bit different. Rather than go through the normal magazine-style podcast that we've been doing for 250 episodes, we're going to just riff. So what do I mean? Well, I've received a lot of comments and questions and topics from all of you out there on all types of different things like Discord and Facebook and email, and we're just going to dive in and have a chat about all the things you have been bringing to me to talk about. Basically, I have this massive list of things people have said and asked recently, and I'm just going to go down the list and address them one by one, no script, completely off the cuff. The point here is that I don't know where this podcast is headed. I can't tell you what it's about yet because I haven't really looked at the list yet, other than just kind of compiling it. I haven't looked at the things and, given it a lot of thought. But I'm going to do that now with you live-ish because, it's recorded and stuff. But first, I have to give a special thanks to Robbie and Kent, who have helped this podcast avoid ads. Thank you so much. There are no ads on this podcast because of people like Kent and Robbie and those who donate every month. Visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. Buy me a gallon of diesel, and every one of those gallons of diesel, which I can't use because I still can't drive, helps keep ads off this podcast, and we all like that. So thank you guys. I do absolutely appreciate the support. Now let's dive in here. I have this big list. It's a very big list. And why am I doing this? Because it's been 250 episodes of this podcast, 5 or 6 years, depending on how you count, not counting the bonus episodes. I mean, it's been a lot. There's a lot of content. And it's been going on so long now that a lot of my earlier episodes are just wrong. I mean, they're either wrong because I made mistakes, or things changed, or my opinion has changed as I've learned new things. And while as much as I would like to make this podcast evergreen, where it was a resource for everybody at all times, it's just not how things like this work. Technology changes. I mean, if you were asking me for battery advice back in 2019 when episode 1 aired, I'd give you completely different advice than I would give you today. So, alright, that's what we got. But episode 250 here, this is going to be a bit of a celebration, and we're simply going to go through a whole bunch of stuff here. So let's see what happens. First one we have is from Mort. Thank you, Mort. And I know your name's not Mort, because you said that, but we're going to call you Mort here, so you know who I'm talking about, and nobody else does. So this is what Mort had to say. I very much enjoy listening to your podcast. I started at the beginning, and I'm working my way forward, currently at episode 244. This may be quite a bit late, but I live in mountainous western Oregon. Sounds absolutely beautiful. That is where the Tiki Bago came from. So I've had to deal with being frozen out of my vehicle quite a few times. There are a couple of things I believe you missed in your discussion about what to do. Those of you who listen regularly will remember that I actually had a podcast episode where I talked about different steps you can take to prevent being frozen out of your vehicle and what to do when your vehicle is frozen. And he goes on to say, before commencing more heroic measures, check each and every door on the vehicle. In a van, you may be able to get in the back and haul yourself over or under the bed, and you'll be in. Once in, you can start the vehicle and thaw out the front doors. Yeah, absolutely true. Your goal is not to get through the door you want to. Your goal is to get the vehicle started. That's the goal. And if you can do that by any means necessary, I mean, heck, if you've got remote start, you could possibly set the thing up before you shut it down and you knew there was a freezing weather event coming. Turn the heat on, turn the fan on, leave those things on, and then hit the remote start, and that will help the process. But yes, his point is absolutely valid here. Don't focus on that door, focus on the actual problem. And he goes on to say, don't forget prevention. Smear petroleum jelly on the door seals. Use a rag to rub the jelly in and wipe it off. You do not want that stuff on your clothes. If getting petroleum jelly on yourself is a major concern, buy some non-staining door striker lubricant stick and use that in a similar way. And he actually gave me a link to some, and I actually purchased it, and I have it in my hand. What I don't have is the ability to walk just yet, so that will have to wait for a future review. A couple of comments on here. Yeah, absolutely. What happens sometimes, especially with doors that aren't used very often in hot places, is the rubber, which may or may not be actual natural rubber, but you know what I mean, the gasket between the window and the door actually will stick. And it'll, depending on how your door's set up, it can stick just to the glass or it can stick to another piece of rubber, whatever. This is a big problem with Airstream owners, by the way. Airstreams have custom windows that are made by Airstream, and a constant problem is that the rubber adheres to the glass, and you have to go outside with a credit card and kind of pry it loose. And, well, this may be a solution here. So I have not tried this lubricant stick, but I intend to, and I'm going to put it on the Airstream where I have the biggest problem. This is actually an issue. It should be part of your regular maintenance. I would say once a year you should go around and lubricate these things, possibly with this lubricant stick that he is recommending. One note about petroleum jelly. Petroleum jelly does not react well with things that are made out of latex or natural rubber. It can actually eat it. This is why, if you remember your sex ed classes, it is not the recommended lubricant to use with condoms. Enough said about that, but yeah, so you can buy these other products that will probably be better, and I will try them out. One thing I've heard people use is olive oil, actually. Olive oil, there may be some issues because it can get gummy and stuff, but that's a thing that I've heard people use, and I have personally used silicone spray, which does work, and it is safe. I mean, it's flammable, but after you spray it, that's not a problem. The only issue is it doesn't last all that long. So there will be more about this, but Mort, I really want to thank you for sending that stuff, because that was important stuff that I should have said. Linus also chimes in and says, I've listened to every podcast and re-listening to them starting over. Well, thanks, Linus. Wow, I'm a little embarrassed for some of those episodes, and I hope they're not so terrible. I listen to a lot of podcasts. My number one pet peeve is sponsor interruption. I love the fact that there are no sponsor interruptions in the podcast. You know what, Linus, me too. I mean, I need to bring in a little bit of money to keep the podcast going. This is not a business. I'm not trying to make as much money as possible or anything like that, but I do need a little bit because there are expenses associated with doing a podcast. And I really hate ads. We live in this world now where we have to not only pay for services like streaming services, but now we also have the ads. It used to be you had ads or you paid for it, and now you have both. And it annoys the heck out of me. So this current model we have here with Buy Me a Coffee, Buy Me a Gallon of Diesel, seems to be working well, and I'm going to keep it that way. Some folks have suggested I switch over to Patreon or something like that, and I don't know, maybe, who knows. But for right now, I think things are good. And again, thank you to all of those folks who have actually gone to buymeacoffee.com. There aren't any ads, and let's keep it that way. Linus continues, I am your age, have a 2003 Sprinter van that is fully self-sufficient, kitchenette, bathroom, shower, incorporated heater, AC unit, and onboard propane generator. Propane generator, that's very cool. I started outfitting a minivan, then a GMC Safari, the van of legend that is very difficult to get these days, but then I wanted something I could stand up in. Another good place to find used RVs are the RV-specific storage places. I let the manager know I was looking for something bigger when I stored my Safari, and he hears about stuff from the owners there before they even list the vehicles for sale. You know they are wanting to get rid of it, and I got a great deal, $20,000 US. And there is an on-site repair guy, maybe more facilities have this bonus, to make things even easier and inspected. Plus, he actually worked on this van in the past. The longer I have had it, I realize that everything works. So, double bonus. And he goes on about possibly meeting in Chicago. I mean, who knows? Right now I can't even walk, so I can't make any plans like that. But thank you very much, Linus. I do really appreciate the comments, and that is a great tip. So, in the U.S., I assume in other countries, but in the U.S., especially up north, there are these massive lots where people store their RVs for the winter. And by RVs, of course, we're including vans in that. That happens too. And as with anything, people buy things and use them for a while and then forget about them. And there's this overwhelming urge for folks, especially folks who aren't really hurting for money, to just get rid of stuff. They're not trying to get top dollar. They're just trying to get rid of it. And they just want a decent price. His suggestion is actually very good. If you could get to know somebody who runs one of these storage lots and just let them know, hey, if you hear about anyone selling an RV, let me know. And you can even, incentivize them. Say, hey, look, dude, if you hear about anyone selling an RV, let me know. And if I buy it, I'll give you $100. Whatever. you could probably get a really good deal on one of these RVs. And it's interesting, the one he bought here, a 2003 Sprinter. That's one of the very first Sprinters that came to the U.S., and that's the legendary 5-cylinder engine, the T1N, the good Sprinter, as they say. As long as you don't get the Black Death, that thing should run forever. So congrats on that, and thanks very much for sharing that tip. I think it's a great tip. Oh, Harry. Harry sent a tough one. This deserves its own episode, but I'm going to tackle it here a little bit. And yes, I'm reserving the right to turn any of these topics into topics for future episodes, because this is kind of a special episode. But Harry says, I was wondering, do you have any tips for part-time van life when living in a big city? Me? Me, who does part-time van life living in the big city? Yes, I just might have some things to say about that. He goes on to say, I currently live close to Center City, Philadelphia. I don't feel comfortable parking a van on the street here, so I'd probably get a parking space or garage. I've also considered moving further out as my lease ends in April. Okay, Harry, huge topic. So, first off, I live in a big city and I do part-time van life. And I've done that in different ways. Okay, so let me go through my van life journey, and maybe this will be informative to other people. I started with an NV200. It's a small Nissan van. It's actually smaller than a Dodge Caravan. It's smaller than a regular minivan. So parking it on the street wasn't difficult in terms of space, but where I built this thing out was in a garage that I couldn't park the van in. So I had a very strange arrangement here that's unique to this very odd lot we had in the Mayfair part of Chicago. And basically, I had a space to work indoors, and I could work in the van, but the van wasn't indoors. So I always had to park the van on the street. And that worked out pretty well, because sometimes you need space just to work. Like, I remember building the ceiling panel, which in this van was just one big panel, and I could not have done that in the van. I would need to be outside to do that, and I was able to do it in the garage, and that worked fine. And that NV200 parked on the city streets of Chicago in a neighborhood. Now, to be clear, Chicago is a city that has neighborhoods. There's lots of houses. It's not like Boston or DC, where a lot of the city is just city and then everyone lives outside of it. Chicago is a city where people actually live. So the place where I was parking it was a street with lots and lots of houses. But it was a neighborhood that did have some crime problems, and some cars got broken into and stuff, and I was always worried about it. But, you know, I was embracing stealth as much as I could then. So unless you knew what was going on, it just looked like a boring work van, which I will tell a little story about. I found out that NV200, whose name is Paguris, and who now belongs to Wendy and is still prowling the streets of Chicago, so far as I know, was a Dairy Queen maintenance van. There actually was a ghost sign on the van that looked vaguely familiar, and I was able to figure out it was a big Dairy Queen logo. And based on what I found in the van, it was used to just do general maintenance at Dairy Queen's. There was this white stain on the floor, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I found out later it was actually melted ice cream. Yeah, so that's kind of fun. But yeah, I just parked that on the street. I never had anyone mess with it ever, ever, ever. And I will tell you a story that is going to be amazing, because it was amazing to me. I had to go on a trip, and I needed to have a lot of cash for that trip. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a trip that required a lot of cash. I went to the bank and got the cash and, you know, did all the stuff I needed to do, rushed around, packed, parked the van knowing it was going to sit on the street for a long time, and then everything was fine. I came back, the van was there, but when I got back into the van, after the trip was over, I looked on the passenger seat, and there was a $100 bill sitting on the passenger seat in complete view to the world. Anybody walking down the sidewalk would have seen this $100 bill if they had just glanced in. And it was still there. Nobody messed with it. So there is a difference between perception and reality, and no, you're never completely safe. And in Chicago, for example, the highest rate for this kind of crime are the wealthiest districts. So if I were in the Gold Coast, for example, there's more chance my car would have been broken into. Although if I were living in the Gold Coast, I could probably afford a garage. All right, so that's one story. That is one way that part-time van life in the city can happen. Fast forward, my wife and I to move closer into downtown. We live on the border of Lakeview and Lincoln Park, if you're familiar with Chicago. And we move into a condo. Condo comes with one parking space. And that's got to belong to my wife. She's the main breadwinner. She absolutely deserves to have the parking space. So there is no question about that. Plus, the parking space is indoors, and the door is 6'2". And while my NV200 could barely get through that door, when I bought my Sprinter ambulance the following year, there's not a chance it's getting through that door. The Sprinter ambulance is like 9'6" or something. This is a very tall vehicle. I bought it as an ambulance, and my idea was that because it's an ambulance, it's mostly built out, which is a lie. It is a lie. Ambulances are not mostly built out. Ambulances are built out with stuff that is in your way that you want to remove, and that is very difficult. That's a whole other story. But I was in the situation where I was living in Chicago, and I had this Sprinter van, and I needed to build it out, but I had no place to work. I did rent a parking space in a secured lot, which, convenient to me, was behind my condo, so I did have that going for me. But the spaces were very narrow. There was no power, no place to store tools, and I basically had to build out the van in the van with all the tools. And the way I dealt with that was I would, every day, working on the van, I'd either go to Home Depot or Menards, and I would alternate. I didn't want to make a pest of myself. And then park, go into the store, get the supplies for that day, come back out, work in the van, and then every time I was like, I need some more of these screws, I'd lock up the van, go back in the store, and get more screws. I never had a problem with Home Depot or Menards ever giving me any trouble with this. I was very kind and considerate. I parked away from the front door in a place where nobody else was. I wasn't taking up any space. I didn't leave trash around, that kind of thing. And that worked. However, it was a pain in the butt. It's very difficult to have your workspace be the project. Like, having all your stuff in the space you're trying to alter is really difficult. And I also had the problem of like disposing of things. So I had cabinets and benches and a chair and all this stuff coming out of the ambulance. Well, where am I going to put that? Some of it I was able to put in the condo dumpster. I mean, I'm a condo resident. I'm paying for this condo, so I'm paying for the dumpster. But, I can't fill up the dumpster with this stuff. And what I ended up doing was I had to rent a storage unit. So down the street I had a storage unit, and I put a bunch of stuff in there. And this was a pain. However, it's doable. And if you watch YouTube channels like Foresty Forest, you will see that he built out his entire van in parking lots of Home Depots, etc. So that is a thing you can do. Now, I was so frustrated with this, and it was taking me so long to finish the van, and I kept just running into all these problems because I simply didn't have the space to work. I remember I was out one night, it was 40 degrees, and I'm trying to get the propane hookups to work under the stove, and I bought a European stove, and I had to adjust the jets, and it just wasn't working right. It was dark, and I was just stuck. I had to fix this, and I just had to tough it out. It would have been so much easier if I'd had a shop, but that got me thinking, maybe I should buy a piece of land somewhere. Really cheap, useless piece of land, and just have a place to park the van, and I could get a cheap shed and put stuff in there. And I mentioned this to my wife, and she said, that's not a terrible idea. So we found a little piece of land in Indiana by Indiana Dunes National Park. And my thought was, well, this would be great, because after I'm done building out the van, we'll have this place to park the van right by the park. And we could just, sleep there at night and then go to the park during the day, and it would be wonderful. And when I talk about cheap, I mean, I think it was $7,000 or $8,000. This was not a lot of money relative to the cost of land. I thought this was fine. Now, there was a problem in that it was about 90 minutes away from where we live, so I'd have to travel, and okay, that's not great. And then my wife got a lot more interested in this project. She said, I always wanted to have like a cabin on a lake. And I thought, that would be nice, and that would work. And so we looked all over for cabins on lakes, and then we finally found a property on a lake on a haunted road, northern Illinois, and I really thought that's what we were going to do. But I decided to expand a little bit further, and long story short, or longish story shortened, we ended up with Tiki Bago land, which is this 4 acres of land on the Illinois River, which is far, far more than I ever would have thought we would end up with. And that property has power and has a large garage. I guess it's large. It's not very tall. I can't pull the van in there, but I have a place to work. And so now I have a base, like a home base that's not the condo, but I can do all the work I need there. I can store paint, I can run a saw, I can do all that stuff. And that's where I'm currently working on my vehicles. So, in short, to wrap up the possibilities of doing van life when you live in the city, if you already have a van that's built out, your problem is simply finding a secure place to park. And of course that's tricky. A gate, while certainly people can hop the gates, that is a level of protection that is probably enough. Because remember, thieves are lazy. They don't want to have to do work, and if they see a gate, they're going to assume cameras. They don't want to deal with that. There are easier pickings out there. If you do have to park on the street, move the vehicle often. That's key. They are more likely to attack a vehicle that has just been sitting there for a while. Also, if you park on the street, this is a problem I have here in Chicago, stuff happens on streets. For example, the street next to my condo is free parking in Chicago. If anybody is looking for parking in Chicago, you want to visit Chicago, let me know. I have some ideas for you. But this one street that is totally free to park on, you can park there overnight, also has street sweeping and tree maintenance and painting and things like that. And they'll put notices up with like a 3-day notice. Hey, in 3 days, we're going to trim the trees. Well, if you leave that a week, yeah, you could go back and see that your vehicle's been towed because they were doing street sweeping or something. And unless you checked it every day, you wouldn't even know. So, is it possible to do part-time or even full-time van life in big cities? It absolutely is. You do have some things to overcome, and those are the things I did to overcome them. So I hope that is of some help. Please, if anybody has any questions or wants to know more or wants to find out where to park in Chicago, get a hold of me at jeff@builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. Repro in the Discord channel came up with this idea, which is probably a big enough idea for a whole episode, but we're going to just tackle it really quickly here. The 3 best things in my van under $20. Wow. All right, that's a tricky one. So Repro himself came up with some ideas, and one of them, which I actually might be on my list, is a brush or a hand broom or a hand brush. I actually got in an argument with someone from Ireland about the proper terminology here, but a little thing you can sweep out the van with. We'll call it that. Yeah, that is actually a very, very useful thing that you don't hear people talk about a lot, but if you want to have a happier van life, get something you can easily sweep out the van with every day. And, while a full-size broom might be easier in some cases, the little hand broom lets you do all kinds of things. It's a very handy tool to have. And if you're paying more than $20 for it, I'm going to suggest you're paying too much. So I think that is a great idea. Well, and heck, I'm just going to give you all 3 of his because they're really good, and then I'll add some of my own. A folding stool, which I've talked about a lot. A folding stool, those little plastic folding stools, they're not very expensive. They're great. You just pull over the van, and if you know you're going to stay for a while, you put the stool out. It makes getting in and out of the van so much easier. And for folks like my wife who are a little bit shorter stature, it helps them get into the van in the first place. So that is a great thing to have, and they're less than $20. They also serve as like a little table if you're sitting outside in a lounge chair, and they help you get like higher up on the windshield to clean off snow or whatever. There's a lot of uses for these things. They take up very little space. You can usually tuck them behind a seat or under a seat or something like that. And yeah, I'm not going to, by the way, this episode, I'm not doing any affiliate links or anything. This episode is for you guys, and you can find this stuff. It's pretty generic. Number 3, a thermos flask. So Repro really likes his thermos flask. I have to say, this is one of those items that, at least in my life, I end up with 30 of them. I used to have a job where I went to conventions all the time, and I've gone to conventions for fun, and if you don't get a tote bag, you seem to get one of these flasks. So I have a whole bunch of them. And I have to say, they're pretty good. My favorite right now is the Skeptoid Hydro Flask, which I received as a gift for supporting Skeptoid. If you've not heard of Skeptoid as a podcast, it's Skeptoid, the podcast. It's a great podcast that examines pop culture and occult and pseudoscience kind of things and gives it a rational look to see how real it is. I've been involved with them for a long time, and I highly recommend you check out that podcast. But they did give me a Hydro Flask as a thank you for being a supporter. That is a really nice mug. Now, it's expensive. I looked up how much they cost because I'm like that. And yeah, they're expensive, but it is the one flask to rule them all. You can actually pour hot coffee in the thing, and you will still have hot coffee hours later. And the same thing with ice and stuff. So one of those is definitely a great thing to have. They're easy to clean. They're comfortable to use. And I find that the cheaper ones generally, they're just not that. I mean, they look the same, but they are just thin one wall. The Hydro Flask has two walls, and the lid doesn't fit right. And they're just not as nice. And for something you're going to use all the time, I do recommend you get one. However, remember, the challenge here was under $20. The Hydro Flask is not under $20. So for under $20, the one of these that I like the best actually is Ozark Trails. Say what you want about Walmart, and I will probably agree with you, but some of the Ozark Trails stuff is a good value. Some of it, not all of it. But one of the things that is a good value is basically their copy of a Hydro Flask. It's not as nice, but for under $20, which it is, it's pretty nice. It does have the double wall, and it does keep drinks cold or hot, and the lid is pretty good. And I've had this one here. See, there it is. I've had it for 5 years. It's still going strong. So that works too. Now, what about things that are my ideas rather than Repros? I don't know if you can still get these for $20 or not, but when I got mine, I think it was $19.95, and that was a butane stove. Those little butane stoves, not the hiking ones, the gas one is a typical brand. The ones that look like little burners that you put the butane canisters in, those things are workhorses. They're flexible, they produce a lot of heat, you can easily boil a pot of spaghetti with them. The canisters are small and disposable or recyclable, unlike the propane ones. They're harder to find. I get mine on Amazon by the dozen, and if you're in a pinch, you can find them in Asian grocery stores. They always have them. But these little stoves are really, really flexible and great. And even if you have a built-in stove in your van, I recommend you have one. It might be a little bit cheating on the $20 part, but it's not that far off. Here's a weird one. It's around $20. I actually don't know how much this costs, but it's a bumper guard. Now, back to the previous conversation about doing van life in cities. You know, my truck and my van are big, and parking them in cities is a pain in the butt, so I'm often squeezing into spaces. So I have a front license plate bracket that I think it's called bumper shocks, but it is a thing that if I accidentally tap the vehicle in front of me, it won't do any damage, basically. And it's this rubber thing, and it just goes over your license plate, and I have those on a lot of my vehicles, and I think they are wonderful things. And if you live in the city, they're great. Now, if you're doing van life out in Colorado, and yeah, you're never going to need this thing. It's just going to be a place to collect bugs. But in the city, it's very useful. And I will add this one. This is a brand new favorite. I'm going to do a full product review of this in a future episode, but it's a fan. Now, I love fans, and you have probably heard me sing the praises of the Venti fan, which I will continue to do. I love my Venti fan. It is expensive, but I love it. However, the Venti fan is a little bit big, and it wasn't where I needed it to be. It's down in Tiki Bagel Land. I needed a fan up here while I'm sitting in my chair waiting for my foot to become a foot again. So I bought another one, and I love it. This one is also great. It's different, but let me explain, and I'll do a full review later, but This fan is called a Gaia Top. That's the name of it. Gaia Top. G-A-I-A-T-O-P. I'm going to read the thing. Mini portable stroller fan, battery operated, small clip-on detachable, 3-speed rechargeable, 360 degrees, rotate flexible tripod, better cooling for car seat, crib, treadmill, travel, black. Now, they do come in other colors. I got the black one because it was $1 cheaper for some reason, but you can also get it in white, pastel blue, pastel green, pastel pink, and pastel lavender. What is special about this little tiny fan is that it has its own battery, so it's a rechargeable USB-C charging thing. That is good. It's the stand. I mean, the quality of the fan is good. It blows enough that it cools you off. It has 3 speeds. That's good. It's on a gimbal that you can swivel and rotate. That's all good. The special thing about this fan is that its base is a tripod, and that tripod is, if you remember the Gorilla tripods, the kind that are like tentacles that wrap around things, that's what it has for a base. So you can put this on anything. Like it says, you can put it on your treadmill, you can put it on a stroller, you can hang it from the bars in the top of your van like I have because I have an ambulance. You can put it anywhere, and you can always have air blowing on you. And for me, I got this mostly for travel. I will probably use it in the van, but that wasn't primarily what I was thinking. However, if you have a no-build situation or a minivan or something like that, this little fan is great, and it would be a great gift for somebody too. I should probably do a Christmas get gifts thing, but I love it. I'll do the full review. It's not perfect, but it's very good, and it's only $16. So I love this thing. I use it all day, every day, and honestly, even though it's battery powered, I actually power it directly from my computer. So while I have my computer on, this thing's plugged into it, and it works great. So I'm not even going to give you a link for that. I'll give you a link in the future when I do the full review, but the Gaia Top Mini Portable Stroller Fan is actually an excellent thing for van life and one of my favorite under $20 things. Thank you for that suggestion, Repro. That was great. Okay, this one, I just wanted to mention this project that someone in the Discord channel has done. So her name is Nelly in a Can, and she showed up in the Discord channel one day and asked a bunch of questions, and we talked about ways to solve some issues she was having, and she figured it out in a way that I think is worth mentioning. So Nelly has a Zero Breeze. So Zero Breeze is, one of these 12-volt portable air conditioners that look like magic. Now, the reviews on these things have been mixed, but Nelly loves hers. She absolutely loves it. Now, when you're looking at these 12-volt air conditioners that are portable, one thing that's not obvious right away is that they have these huge hoses. You'll see the unit and it looks all cute and stuff, like it looks like a little robot from the future or something, but it has huge hoses that attach to it, and those hoses need to go places. So the Zero Breeze has 2 hoses, and they basically need to get outside the vehicle. Now, some people stick them out windows, and there's adapters and things like that. There's a bunch of tricks you can do, but Nelly wanted a kind of a professional, good-looking way to do this. And so she thought, what if she drilled holes in the side of her van and put nice looking covers over those holes, and that would let the air come in and out. And she thought this was a great idea. Everybody thought this was a decent idea. The problem is that it's scary. It was a curved piece of metal, and if she got the hole size wrong, it would have been a problem. And she was just a little nervous about doing this. And so what she did, which I think is brilliant and is a good lesson for all of us, is she took it to an auto body shop and said, hey, here are these vents. Can you install these in my van right here? And she explained it to them. And they did. And it cost her like $250. It probably took them 20 minutes because they do stuff like this all the time. And now she has exactly what she wanted, a very professional looking solution for venting the Zero Breeze. Now, she still has to solve the problem of water ingress, which won't be that difficult. She needs to put some kind of a flap on there or something. She will figure that out. But I thought, wow, great illustration of van life troubleshooting and coming up with unique ways of making things work. So I wanted to mention that to you folks in case you were in a similar situation, but also to point out that auto body shops can be a resource for your van life, even if you haven't been in a wreck. Very good stuff. And Nelly, I think that's awesome. And that leads us to the next topic, which is 12-volt air conditioners in general. So every year now, I think, every spring, I say the same thing, which is like, no, you can't have air conditioning in your van unless you're plugged into shore power. I think I've said that every year. And then the last couple of years I've said, unless you want to spend a whole lot of money, because it's true that if you put a whole lot of solar and a whole lot of batteries in your van, you can actually run a number of air conditioners. We're getting closer. And when I just happened to go on eBay for some reason, and I don't have great respect for eBay. We'll put that aside for now, but it is a resource. I went on eBay and I saw an EcoFlow Wave 2 air conditioner refurbished by EcoFlow for $399. And I looked at that and said, I don't really want this thing. I don't really think it's going to work, but I think I have to buy it. And so I did. So I have an EcoFlow Wave 2 air conditioner coming. It has not come yet. And it was $399. Now, I don't know exactly what the story is. Apparently, EcoFlow had a number of units that they refurbished and they're selling again, and when I look on eBay now, it's listed as sold out. So I'm sorry this deal does not exist anymore. But I will at least thoroughly review this thing and let you know of its feasibility, and then I'll be able to talk more intelligently about air conditioning in vans running off 12 volts. My first impression is that I think it will work in some cases. However, it's fairly big, and it requires tons of hoses, and the hoses are huge. And I think I'm going to end up in a situation where I'm not going to permanently install this in the van. It's going to be something that I will only use on the hottest days in the summer, and then I don't know. I haven't figured out exactly how this is going to work. I can use it in my truck, I can use it in my Scamp, I could use it in my van, and I will play around with it. But so, just so you know, that is something that's coming. I will let you know how I do with this EcoFlow. And that price was amazing. These things list for well over $1,000. And so, heck, maybe it won't even work at all. So stay tuned for that. A gentleman by the name of Rock the Smurf sent me some great content about remote jobs that you can do online. And he has a lot of experience with this. And there's a lot of them. And I will actually devote time to this in the next episode when it's the next normal episode. But he has a bunch of links to share with you guys. I'll just list them off really quickly. We Work Remotely, Flex Jobs, Remote OK, Remote Code, Jobspresso, Remotive, Just Remote, Virtual Vocations, Outsourcely, Skip the Drive, AngelList, on and on and on. So I will have those for you next week. Again, I feel bad that I'm not a better resource for remote jobs, but that's one of the big things to overcome in van life. Folks like Rock the Smurf here are going to help us out. And thank you. I will definitely talk more about this in the next episode. Okay, next one is from Brent. Brent from Discord. Brent says, someone just bought a van that's fully drivable, but not necessarily prepped for van life. What is the minimum they need to take it out for a long weekend where they'll be sleeping in it? So 2 nights. Perhaps at varying levels of convenience comfort. As in, how much do you need to shower versus wet wipes versus dry shampoo? That's his first question. So, I think this is a great idea. I think, honestly, one of the best things you can do in van life is if you're going to build out an empty van, go out right away. Just get in and go and treat the thing like a tent. Do exactly what you would do if you were camping with a tent, except instead of a tent, you've got a metal tent. You've got a metal tent on wheels with an engine. When you do that, you're probably not going to have the greatest night's sleep, but you're going to learn so much about what you want to do and what needs to be done. I did this myself in my NV200 in the winter. I actually had all this kind of like crappy plastic shelving stuff that was just laying around in the basement, and I put it in the van. I did buy a folding cot style bed, and I slept on that, and I had the butane stove and a water bucket with a spigot, and that's basically it. And I went out and I had a miserable night. There were icicles hanging from the ceiling. My butane froze and I couldn't use the stove. I didn't have any heat, so on and so forth. But it was incredibly educational. It showed me exactly what I needed to get that van where I wanted it to be. And I finally did. I mean, when I sold that van, it was exactly how I wanted it. It was a great van. So why did you sell it? That's a longer story, and it's basically because it had so many miles on it, I was afraid that I needed something with fewer miles. That's actually a topic for a whole episode as well, and I've talked about that a lot. But the bottom line is, what's the minimum you need to go out in a van that's not built out? I mean, it's the minimum you need for camping. A decent sleeping bag, some sort of a pad or something to sleep on, a source of water, a way to eat, whatever that looks like. Maybe you bring freeze-dried stuff and you heat it on a stove, whatever, figure that out. It's all the same problems as camping. And that leads to his next add-on here is like, what about staying clean? And that is a whole other topic, but folks, showers are nice, but they're not necessary. You can stay clean without taking showers every day. You can use wet wipes or the bigger wet cloths like they use in medical facilities that I like. That's what I use often. You can also do sponge baths, and if you really want to do a shower, there are ways to have a shower in your van, whether it be its own separate room if you have a bigger van, or a dog pool with a USB pump. I mean, there's tons of ways to do it. Even a spray bottle like they use at the barber to spray your hair before they cut it, that can give you a decent shower too. So that's a solvable problem. There's no question about that. You absolutely can stay clean in a van. You do not have to have a shower every day. He goes on to say, related, what might be some good reference specs for vans meant for van life? So how would you kit out a no-build van that will only be used on weekends, or a minimal basic build for longer trips, but not necessarily full-time? That's a tricky question, and I am writing a book, folks, and that will be in my book. There will be a whole chapter or section on this topic about what exactly are you building out in your van. So I am doing different approaches. I have a wealth of vehicles, which is ridiculous, but I do. My Sprinter van I built out to be a full-time camping rig that can do anything, anywhere. Winter, summer to some extent. I can go off-road to a limited degree, very limited degree, because I have low clearance. But I can basically live in that thing fully prepped for a week without doing anything else. That is the purpose of that. My truck, I want it to be a truck, but I also want to be able to go camping in it. So I have to balance that. And as far as reference specs go, you basically need a place to sleep. That's the number one thing. You need a place to sleep that's comfortable. That should be most of your focus. And that means it's got to be dry, it's got to be comfortable, and then very closely related is you have to be temperature controlled enough. Now, you're never going to have your van temperature controlled the way you do in a house or a condo. It isn't, you're just not going to do that. Even in the Airstream with all its fancy crap, it's not the same. Yeah, we've got a big air conditioner, I can set the temperature as a thermostat, but it's still not the same. The temperature is going to vary a lot, and it's even worse in a van. It's worse the smaller the vehicle is, basically. So get rid of that notion of always having the thing at 72 and learn to be flexible. But you do need to stay warm. So you want to have a good sleeping bag no matter what. And then depending on how cold it is, you're going to need a supplement source of heat. As far as food, water, and bathrooms go, that's completely up to you. I will point out that some of the most predominant van life people on YouTube, such as Foresty Forest and Chrome and a whole bunch of the others, they don't have bathrooms in their vans. A Combi Life, for example, I don't think they have a bathroom in their van. They certainly don't have a separate room for it. They do have a shower that's outside. I've seen that. So I personally want to have some sort of toilet in my van as some kind of an emergency device. I may not use it very often. I've definitely gone on week-long trips and never used it, but I want it to be there. That's completely up to you. And that's just a matter of buying a toilet or a bucket or however you're going to handle that. So the argument here is basically, what do you need? And this is going to be a trial and error thing. But can you do van life comfortably in what we call a no build, which is something where you can put everything in and take everything out, as I want to do with my truck? And there's just absolutely, you absolutely can. Remember, people go camping in tents. If you're going to camp in your truck or a van, you're steps ahead of that. You've got a dry, raised place already. Anything you can do in a tent, you can do in your van. So you can absolutely do that. But as far as specs, I mean, so long as you have your sleeping sorted out, the rest is just details of your trip. If you're in the city, you might just need the bed and that's it. Maybe the bed and a battery to charge your things and that's it. If you're going out in the boonies, okay, you're going to need a way to cook and a way to stay clean and all that stuff. So it really depends on the situation, but I will be talking more about that. And then the last one, Brent, you raised some pretty heavy topics here, or at least big topics. I don't know how heavy it is. Name 1 to 3 remarkable free things to see or do in major sections of the United States, such as New England, the Southwest, etc. That could be a whole big topic for an episode. Every single region of the country has something that's free and fascinating. That is an easy statement for me to make. It is a little more difficult now with the current situation where public facilities are being either eliminated or having fewer staff or whatever. That is tricky. And the prices at the public facilities are going up too. I mean, as I mentioned a few episodes ago, Arizona State Parks has really raised their prices. National parks have fees, all that. But it doesn't matter. There are absolutely amazing things to see everywhere. Let me see if I can come up with some examples. In southern Florida, you can drive to the Keys, and while van life in the Keys is difficult, the drive itself is its own reward. If you do that, you will see a place where you are driving on a bridge and you can't see land on either side. You're basically driving on a bridge across the ocean. That's pretty remarkable. In South Dakota, there's the Enchanted Highway. At the start of the Enchanted Highway, let me go back a step. The Enchanted Highway is a bunch of these massive metal sculptures this guy built, and you can follow them along until you get to a town where there's a restaurant and a little museum about them. Totally free. Interesting thing to do. And the first one of these is on this bluff that overlooks a farm, a big farm. And one of my favorite things that I've seen in all my travels was to be up there in the van and look out and see somebody just harvesting the crop. He's driving this big tractor, and it was such a big vista, a big sky event, that the tractor, even though it was massive, seemed very small. And you could just see him, kind of going across the crops, and in front of him was this lush green, and behind him was this deep, rich soil. And it was a really nice moment. And those you can find just about everywhere. In New England, wow, if you drive up 93 in New Hampshire, there's a number of things you can see. And I've mentioned these in my places to visit things, but there's a spot where you can pull off 93 and you basically walk on a trail under the highway, and you get to these glacial pools that all these famous people have bathed in. Like Thoreau used to bathe there and stuff, and it's just there. It's just right there. It doesn't cost a thing. These things exist just about everywhere in the country, and it's up to you to find them. I mean, that's kind of the adventure. I like pointing them out when I find them, but honestly, it's more fun to find them on your own. Like, I knew I was going to Enchanted Highway. I was going to try that out. I didn't know there was this big bluff where I could watch this just incredible vista where I could see farmers at work. It seems like a simple little thing, but at that moment, the temperature was just right. The sun was in the right place in the sky. I mean, it was pretty amazing. So I will continue to add these things to a place to visit in every single podcast, but there is no end of them. They are everywhere. And honestly, I've had people request that I will take all these places and publish them somewhere. And I would do that if it wasn't so much work, but I don't think it's necessary, because the better experience is to find them for yourself. You want to have a really amazing trip that you will never forget? Pick a state. That's it. Go there. Your dedication is to spend so many nights in this state. That's it. That's all you're going to do, and see what happens. I bet you find some amazing things doing that. Thank you, Brent. Very good questions. Okay, wow, this is getting long, but this is a special episode, so I'm going to keep going, and if it's too long, just shut it off. That is the power you have. Van life apps. This is a tough one. Several people have asked me this. I don't have a name specifically, but what are the van life apps you use? And I did an episode on van life apps. It was a lot of work to research them all, and now half those apps don't exist, and so it's tough. iOverlander, I still think, is the king of apps. It is terribly problematic because anything in iOverlander tends to get overrun. I have this now infamous story of me putting a place on iOverlander, and then 2 years later it was shut down because so many people went there. And it's not because of me, it's because I found a spot in a place where there weren't any other spots, so everybody went there. I now have another secret spot down near Garden of the Gods in southern Illinois, not the one in Colorado, that I won't tell anybody about, or at least I won't put it on iOverlander. I will tell you about it if you really want to know, but I won't put it on iOverlander because I don't want it to get ruined. But still, that app is a good resource, and it's the best I can see right now. There's also freecampingsites.net, which is a website and an app, but I tend to use the website for that. Same idea, different listing, and what I will often do is cross-reference them. If I find something good in one, and I'll look on the other. There's a bunch of other apps coming that do connections, like the Crossroads app, that I don't think have fully matured yet. I give them all a chance. I will give them a chance, but I haven't seen any of them really maturing. And so ultimately, the best van life apps are simply the best apps that you're using anyway. What is your need, and is there an app for it? And there will be. One that I will add, not specifically, but a category of apps that's particularly useful for van life that a lot of people won't ever need, are the highway weather driving apps. I've used a few, and they've leapfrogged as to what's useful and what isn't. I actually got in a fight with one of the developers once, which was weird. But these apps will predict weather over time. So you can say, hey, I'm going to drive from Chicago to Reno, Nevada, and I'm going to leave at this time. What's the weather going to be like? And it will take the weather projections and overlay them on your route, and it will say, oh, well, by the time you get to Iowa, you'll be in heavy rain, and that kind of thing, and then you can adjust if you want to. It will also tell you what's the best time to leave. What is the best weather window I have between Chicago and Reno? This is actually from the sailing community. The sailing community has apps like this, which you can see are actually much more important, but it's good for van life too. So that is a good thing to look at, and I'm not going to give you a specific recommendation at this time. Van life apps is a big topic. I will continue to come back to it, but right now, I don't feel like it's worthwhile to put in the effort to go through all of them and give yays or nays because it's such a changing landscape. So when I find a good one, I will simply mention it. Steve has asked about the implications of electric parking brakes. So electric parking brakes are simply parking brakes without a handle. These are very common in small vehicles now. You'll just see a little P button with brackets around it. Those brackets, by the way, are drum brakes. That's what the picture is. It's supposed to look like drum brakes with the P inside the drum and the shoes being the brackets. So anyway, just a little bit of trivia. But the way they work is when you park, you press the button, or sometimes it's automatic, and it will apply these brakes. Now, what are parking brakes? Well, in most vehicles, parking brakes are a supplemental set of cables that will attach to the rear brakes and pull them as tight as possible, thus locking the rear wheels. There are a lot of variations on this. Some parking brakes are actually on the transmission and not the wheels. Some of them are on the drive shaft. It'll just lock the drive shaft so the wheels... There's a lot of different ways, but that's the most common. In the old days, you would have either a lever or a pedal on the floor that would activate it, and by pressing on the pedal, which is how it is in my 2019 Ram 1500, you would stretch that cable, which would lock the rear brakes. If you have a lever, it's the same thing. As in my 2011 Sprinter, there's a big lever, I pull it up, and that locks the rear brakes. So which is better? Well, the electric brakes are more convenient and save space inside. You don't have to have a pedal on the floor, and you don't have to have a big handle somewhere. You just have a button, and it can be automatic. So if you put the thing in park, it can automatically apply the brakes, which it can't do with the manual ones. However, it's electric, it's electronic, it's more complex, more things can go wrong. What if your battery's dead? I don't actually know. I don't know what happens. If your battery dies before you apply this brake, I'm assuming you can't apply it. But if the battery dies while the brake is applied, does it release? I mean, could you be in a situation where you accidentally leave the vehicle in neutral and you apply the parking brake and then the battery dies over time and the vehicle rolls away? I don't know. I don't know. I think in most trucks and vans, these things are not quite that common yet. In the newer ones, they might be. On the other side, the manual handbrakes, and I do think a manual handbrake is the best thing. The pedals are okay, but I don't think they're as good. Simply because you can use the manual handbrake to slow down your vehicle. There are a few occasions where this is useful. The obvious one is that these brakes are not always called parking brakes. Sometimes they're called e-brakes, which are emergency brakes. The brakes in most vehicles are hydraulic. If that hydraulic system fails for whatever reason, if you get one of the hoses bursts and all the fluid leaks out, no brakes, this will still work because it's a cable. And you can pull up on that handle and have a controlled stop. There's a button you press, and that will prevent it from locking. And you can just lift it up and actually slow the vehicle down under complete control. And then when you want to lock it in place, you let go of the button. That's pretty good. I think that is a great system. It gets in the way of seat swivels. It takes up space. I get all that. But that system, I think, is the safest and most flexible. So, should you avoid a vehicle with an electronic handbrake? Not necessarily. You just have to understand what it can and can't do. And I will add this one thing here. If you are interested in creative driving, if you have a handbrake and you need to turn around very quickly, you can grab the steering wheel, pull the handbrake, and at the same time turn the wheel all the way, and your vehicle will instantly spin. It's a little dangerous, not something you want to do at high speed, but it's actually how you see vehicles spin around in Hollywood movies and stuff. I don't know that you would actually have any real use for this, but that is a thing you can do with handbrakes that you can't do with any other kind of brakes. So, yeah. And one last thing, handbrakes are pretty easy to repair. It's just literally a cable going to the back brakes. It's not that complex, so it's not that expensive to repair. Electronic handbrakes, if something goes wrong with them, it's expensive to repair, and you really have to do it right away. So that's my 2 cents on that. And thank you for asking the question, Steve. Scott, who has YouTube videos that are much more popular than mine. Scott is asking about YouTube that I watch. Now, that's an interesting question because back in 2019, when I was first doing this, I was watching van tours endlessly. I probably watched 20 or 30 van tours a day. I watched big vans, little vans, all these kind of things. Got a lot of ideas from those, and I discarded a lot of ideas because I thought they were ridiculous. And I mean, that's kind of the point. Now that I've built out a few vans, I tend not to watch those so much. I will still if there's something interesting. But there's a lot of vans that are basically doing the same concept where you have the raised fixed bed and there's a garage underneath and then there's I kind of have seen all that. So I'm looking for new stuff. So I don't really watch those channels anymore. What I watch these days is a little odd. I watch a lot of sailing videos. Now, van life and sailing are very similar. I've mentioned this before, but I'm learning more about van life from the sailing videos than I am from the van life videos, and that's because it changes my perspective. So one of these is Sam Holmes, just like it sounds. He's this guy who's got basically this little beat-up sailboat. I mean, nothing fancy, but he sails all over the world in this thing. He's a little bit of an interesting guy. I did mention him a few episodes ago because he was doing this while he had an ostomy. This guy, if you think you can't do something, watch some of his videos and see what he does and realize that all the stuff he's doing is just him. He doesn't have like a trust fund that I know of. He's not spending a ton of money. He's just very good at planning and solving problems. And it's very inspirational, and that actually informs van life for me, even though it's not about vans. I also watch a lot of Foresty Forest, simply because I like his content. He does not actually talk that much about the specifics of van life, although he lives full-time in a van. But I have learned some things from him, for sure. Combi Life was a big one I used to watch back in the day. I haven't watched as much recently. Unfortunately, due to COVID and relationship changes, the nature of that show has changed a lot. But that is top-rate content. I mean, that is highly produced content. And his original journey from the tip of South America to Alaska in his Combi, his old beat-up Volkswagen van, that's a story. That could be a movie. That's an amazing story. So that was great. I watch a lot of Camping with Steve, who has dabbled in van life, I would say, but is really his shtick is that he camps in really weird places for a night. Like he'll camp in a roundabout, or he'll camp in a pipe, or in an old mine, or behind an old gas station. I mean, just anywhere weird. And he's just such a likable guy that I'll just watch whatever he does. It isn't very informative, really. I mean, you can get some tips. He does have some interesting ideas from time to time, but it's just nice to hang out with this guy. He's just such a nice guy. You just want to spend time with him. And that's why I watch that. And you have to understand that I think most people listening to this podcast are coming at van life a little bit different than me, because of this podcast, have been thinking about this stuff for years now. And I'm at a little bit of a different place than someone just getting into it. So when I was just getting into it, I was looking to solve problems and come up with different ideas. I'm not really there now. Where I'm at is coming up with different perspectives and different concepts about van life, almost the philosophy of van life. And so I'm spending a lot of time there. It's a different space. I will touch on that in the book as well, but that's where I'm at now. That doesn't mean that's where you should be at, and that's also why I keep doing the podcast the way I do, because I don't want this podcast to be just about my personal experience with van life. I want it to be informative to anybody willing to listen. And so I'll still do the product reviews and talk about different innovations and stuff like that. But that's actually not what I watch a lot of on YouTube. So, interesting question, Scott. I will keep pondering that and see if I can come up with a list where, like, if you are interested in how to build out a van, watch this. If you are interested in why you might want to do van life, watch this, etc. I will add that Bob Wells who has endless videos, is an excellent place to start for anybody. And I am a sponsor for Bob Wells. I do give him money every month. But I only watch the videos that are particularly interesting to me at this point. And I think that's totally fine. Okay, Nomad Life Wiki, which is a great resource. You know where to find it because I just told you. Has given me an idea. It's their idea, and basically they're asking me to kind of incorporate the indices of the podcast into the wiki so that people could find stuff. I think that's a really interesting idea. I don't have a lot to talk about it right now. I have to research that and see how much time it'll take and how easily I can do it, but I think that's an interesting idea, and I want to thank Nomad Life Wiki for proposing that. Nomad Life Wiki is a great resource that does not get enough attention. If you are new to van life, go to Nomad Life Wiki and just be amazed at the resources there. It's a lot. In the Discord channel, we had and actually a little bit on the Facebook group, we had a talk about the Chevy Brightdrop. Now, if you remember back in the day, Chevy said that they were no longer going to make the Chevy Express. They were getting rid of the last big American cargo van. There aren't any others. Yeah, they still make the Econolines, but they're cutaways. They don't make an actual van of that. This is the last big American van. And they said they were going to get rid of it and replace it with this thing called the Brightdrop. Well, they've backed off on that now, and the future of EV is all over the place. It's really hard to know what the future is going to be regarding vans a year from now. It's really hard. So they've said that they're going to keep making the Express, at least for another year. And they're also going to make the Brightdrop, and they've actually been making them for a few years. This van, I would argue, is the best electric van candidate for van life for a few reasons. First is that it has the best range. Second, it has fast charging batteries. They claim that if you charge this thing for an hour, you will get at least 162 miles of range out of that. That's not the capacity of the battery. The capacity is actually much bigger. But an hour of charging will give you 162 miles, which is not bad. I mean, a lot of the other EV vans, that's like your max. So, okay. And the shape of the van is beautiful for van life. It's got square walls like a cube van. So it would be a dream to build one of these out. Now there's a couple of drawbacks. The roof is transparent fiberglass, as in a UPS truck or whatever. So it's not the strongest thing in the world. You can't put a lot of weight up there unless you build a scaffolding or something, or a framing, which is fine. You can do that. And it also has a roll-up back door, just like a UPS truck. And that is not great. I mean, it's okay. There are things you can do. And the problem isn't with the door going up. The problem is when the door is up, it eats up a big part of the ceiling, and you lose a lot of ceiling height back there. So you'd have to figure that out. Either you would replace it and just take it out and put in your own doors, or like build a pocket for it to go into and just deal with it. You know, I don't know how insulation would work and wiring and all that. You just have to solve that problem. And of course, these things are expensive. They cost about as much as a Sprinter. You're talking $73,000, $80,000. There's only going to be a few places you can get them serviced, but being an EV, they don't need service. And of course, with these, the big problem is you have to plan your route according to charging. You can't just assume there's a gas station around the corner, which you can with any other kind of van. You have to do very careful planning. But that's something you can do. So I'm looking for someone to buy one of these and convert it into a van, convert it into a camper. I haven't seen anyone do it yet. But of all the EVs out there, I think this one is probably the best van life candidate. And, well, we'll see what happens. Every vehicle on Earth has been made into a camper by somebody at some time. It's only a matter of time before we see a Brightdrop EV camper out there. And who knows, maybe someone like Winnebago or something will actually make one, professionally. And finally, for all you patient folks who have listened to this for this long, thank you so much. Listeners actually are the most important thing to do this podcast. I do this podcast because I want to. It's a podcast that I want to exist, and it didn't exist, so I made it exist. That's it. That's why it happens. But I would not be still doing it if you guys weren't listening. And so thank you for listening. It is absolutely humbling that somebody would listen to me for this long and for this many episodes, and it's really hard to think about at times. So all I can say is thank you. And I also want to reinforce the idea that you guys have control over the content. If you send me questions, send me ideas, whatever. If you're somebody who sells products and you want me to review one, send me the product. I will be happy to do that. You guys have a lot of control. So if there's something you want to hear about, let me have it. Finally, I want to talk about Hook, Waka, Bang, because it has become more and more important lately. Hook, Waka, Bang is the symbol of the College of Curiosity, which is my overarching organization for things like this podcast. It also includes the trips I do, which are a little bit separate. I have a really cool trip coming up next year, though. I'll talk about that in the future. However, what the heck is it? Now, I've sent out stickers all over the world. It's a symbol. It's simple. It's a question mark, a greater than symbol, an exclamation point. And the reason it's called Hook, Waka, Bang is because that's what those symbols are called in comic book speak. The people who do comic books have names for all those characters, and they are Hook, because the question mark looks like a hook. Waka, because the greater than kind of looks like a Pac-Man, and the noise Pac-Man makes is Waka. So it's Hook, Waka. And a bang is an exclamation point, and that's been the thing forever in comics. A splat is an asterisk, and a exclamation point is a bang. So Hook, Waka, Bang kind of rolls off the tongue now. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does question mark greater than exclamation point mean? Well, it means different things to different people, and I've decided that it does not have a set definition, and when people ask me what it means, I simply say it's a curiosity detector. Congratulations, you're a curious person. What does it mean to you? And that usually creates a conversation. But what does it mean to me? Well, what it means to me is ask questions before you react. When you see something offensive, when you see something that generates an emotional response, stop and ask questions and see if you can come up with a better response. And this applies to a great many things. A lot of times it applies when driving. I drive a lot, or I used to back in the day. I will drive a lot again. Oops. I will drive a lot again. And, things happen when you're driving. People cut you off. They go too slow. They don't use their turn signals. They're in the wrong lane. All these things. Blah, 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 blah. And it's easy to just be like, what the hell's wrong with that person? Why didn't they use their turn signal? Why didn't they, whatever. I have that instant reaction. That's the first thing I think of. And then I think of Hook, Waka, Bang, and I'm like, all right, well, maybe that person has a medical emergency. Maybe that person didn't see me. Maybe, there's a lot of maybes. And you know what? I'm probably wrong. It is actually likely that this person is just a jerk. But I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about me and my state of mind. And if I accept the fact that I have also done some of the things that make people angry, and I realize that some of the things I have done to make people angry were because of reasons that the angry person didn't know, it's easier for me to take the perspective of, well, that was odd, and just let it go. And let it go. And that makes my life better. And I'm trying to apply that more and more, not with great success. I will admit, this has been a very angry few months for a number of reasons. But I really want to get back to having that perspective of, let's consider this and let's come up with a better reaction. Sometimes the reaction should be anger. And this is not a tool to stop that. This is a tool to be sure that if you're going to be angry, you're choosing to be angry and you have justified it as much as possible. That's what it means to me. To other people, it just means, yay, science. Or it means questions are better than answers, which is also something I believe, because the answers are actually less important than the properly formatted question, but that's for another time. Anyway, I will once again offer for any of you listening that if you would like a Hook, Waka, Bang sticker in the style of a Euro decal, and you live in the US or Canada, you know what? I'll tell you what. For the very first time, and this is going to cost me money, but it's okay because you guys have been generous. Anybody listening to this, anywhere in the world, if you would like a Hook, Waka, Bang sticker, all you have to do is send me your full address via email at jeff@builttogo.com. I'm not going to save your address. I am not building a big database. I don't care about marketing or advertising or business or any of that. All I want to do is get you a sticker if you want one. And I usually restrict this to the US and Canada because it's expensive. Not this time. If you in that email Put the code word Sagan, Sagan. Put that code word anywhere in the email. I don't care if you live in the Gambia or New Zealand or McMurdo Station, wherever you happen to be. I will mail you a Hook Waka Bang sticker. Just remember, I need your address, and I need that code word. If you're from outside the US or Canada, you guys can get one anyway. So every single time someone requests one of those stickers, it makes me feel good. I like it. It's a good thing. So I will offer that to you. So that's it, folks. You have listened to a very long podcast. I hope you got something out of it. And if you didn't, well, there'll be another one next week. Music, as always, is by Simon Wagg. And until next time, remember the words that I have deleted. Where did it go? My quote's gone. Where did the quote go? Oh, here it is. Remember the words of Mary Ritter Beard, who said, "Certainly, travel is more than the seeing of sights. It is a change that goes on, deep and permanent, in the ideas of living." Thank you.